You'd think, like, I love Gilmore Girls, so this should be an easy read. It was not an easy read.
Dancing the stardust, gentle flow. Dancing in the stardust, we're weightless and free in a world of wonders. Just you and me, lost in the moment. Our spirits ignite.
I was going to reorganize my shelves to make them look better, but I don't want to. Last year I read 128 books with a desk job. I was mainly able to do that because I was allowed to listen to music at my desk, so I would just listen to audiobooks with my AirPods in, and then I'd read for like 20-30 minutes on my phone during my commute. So I got in a pretty good, decent amount of reading throughout my workday, and then I'd come home and like read some more if I felt like it. So I've been consistently tracking my reading since 2014, and I typically read anywhere from 20 to 40 to 60 books a year. And this year was the first year that I ever read like more than 100 books in a year. I actually used to really hate audiobooks because I couldn't find the time to like sit down and like have quiet time to listen to them. But now that I like have to sit at a desk and have the opportunity to listen to audiobooks, then it's gone a lot easier. When I go on walks, I can also listen to audiobooks, and for some reason it just like really works well in my life now. So I actually started the year off reading a lot of self-help books because that's what Spotify audiobooks was really pushing to me at the time, and it was all fun and games and nice until I realized like what the author's perspective was and like how they thought about how the world ran. So like, no, I can't just crash on my friend's couch until I find my artistic vision in order to not pay rent, and I can't just buy the more expensive car because that money will always come back to me. I think there's more to making decisions like that, especially if you are a minority and person of color or just come from much different backgrounds than these authors did. So I quickly grew out of that phase and stopped doing that. I read some books about finance, about sex, about being Asian, and about Palestine, and those books were actually really important and impactful to me because they led me to read a lot more nonfiction, a lot more memoirs, and a lot more political based books this year. Prior to this year, I was a very avid like romance or fantasy reader, and that's all I ever read. Of course, I like dabbled in other genres, but nothing got me to read or read as fast as a romance book did. I think this year changed that because I didn't have to go to class anymore and like study that way. I could pick exactly what I was reading to help myself learn outside of the classroom, and I got to choose more of the information that I was seeking or wanted to learn about, like the topics, better than picking a class. And with it being a very heavily political year, at least in the US, I started reading books about politics. So I started with How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. This year was also the year that I started reading memoirs, and I love memoirs now. Okay, so this is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and I've owned this book for many years now, and I've tried reading it many times. It's not that it was a hard book to read, it's just really gut-wrenching to read about women's stories sometimes. So I ended up audiobooking this, sat at my desk, and I listened to Chanel Miller tell me her story, and I had to pause it a few times because I was just like tearing up at work. It was still like tough to get through, but I think the audiobook helped me just like keep going and really immerse myself in her story, especially because she herself was the one that was narrating it. I finished this, and it opened the door for me to read so many more memoirs this year. Some other memoirs that I read this year were Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, which I absolutely loved. It was so good. I listened to I Swear Politics is Messier Than My Minivan by Katie Porter, Cultured by Daniela Young, Down the Drain by Julia Fox, Loud by Drew Afualo, My Body by Emily Ratajkowski, All the Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I think all those books were read to you by the author if you listen to them, and it just takes your reading experience to a whole new level when it's like the person legitimately like actually telling you their story. It is just such a magnificent and powerful way of storytelling. Highly recommended, and that is now my preferred way of reading memoirs, is like listening to the author read it to you. I'm just gonna look at all the books I read and go through some other stand-up books. I really loved Kim Ji-young, Born 1982 by Cho Nam-ju. That book was incredible. Got me almost crying on my commute. If I got my facts right, this book is what started like the 4B movement in Korea. I just absolutely loved it. I think the storytelling and the way that it just like slowly drives you crazy was incredible. And then later that year I read Welcome to the Yeongnam-dong Bookshop by Hwang Bo-rum, and that was also another one of my favorite books. Those two books I believe were translated from Korean, and they were incredible. I think the bookshop book also caught me by surprise, like how much I really enjoyed it. It's not like anything like crazy happened, it's just, to me, it's like a slice of life. It's very homey feeling. It just feels like a breath of fresh air. Like it's okay to just live life how you want to live it. A little embarrassed to say, the year before I read a lot of Dramani fanfiction and I really liked it, and then this year the only fanfiction I read was All the Young Dudes, and this book or fanfiction deserves all of the praise. I loved it. I finished that and I immediately read Sirius's perspective. So good. Just skip Harry Potter. I read a lot of Ali Hazelwood. I think my favorites were Check and Mate and probably Bride. I'm a sucker for Ali Hazelwood. I love Ali Hazelwood. I read Bright Young Woman by Jessica Knoll. And this book also was really good. It made me think a lot. It's basically a book about serial killing except from the woman's perspective, because a lot of the time we highlight the men. Like there are documentaries made about the serial killer themselves rather than the victims. And I think what the author was trying to do is show you like these victims themselves like deserve to have their name and story told more than the serial killer, like the Jeffrey Dahmer documentary and then Zac Efron playing that serial killer. And it's weird that serial killers have like fan bases and they make them look attractive. There's a reason Zac Efron was casted and a reason why people really enjoyed watching those documentaries. And I haven't watched either of them. I feel very iffy about watching true crime now just because of all of the discourse around it. I read The Rape of Nanking, The Forgotten Holocaust of World War II by Iris Chang, and this was like one of my favorite books I read this year. It was honestly pretty difficult to get through, but I learned so much from this book, so much history that would have been forgotten if no one took the time to collect all that information. I would highly recommend this to anyone. I also really liked Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Maher. Really liked Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. I liked The Message by Te-Nehisi Coates. I really liked Forget Me Not by Julie Soto. I also really liked Not That Bad Dispatches from Ray Culture by Roxane Gay. That book was incredible. And I also really liked I Survived Capitalism and All I Got Was This Lousy T-Shirt by Madeline Pendleton. I really like her TikToks, and I love the way that she explains things in this book and talks about her life and I guess like the money lessons that she's learned because of what she had to go through basically. I'm usually like really easy to please when it comes to reading. The only books that I wouldn't recommend is like The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore, which you think like I love Gilmore Girls, so this should be an easy read. It was not an easy read. And then My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I also didn't love that book. I thought the ending was so ridiculous. The concept itself I really liked, and I thought I would really enjoy this book, but I just couldn't help but laugh at like I think the very end. And then my friend really likes Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin, so I finally read it, but then I couldn't get Read with Cindy's like rant review of this book out of my head, so the entire time I was just like laughing at it instead of like really enjoying my reading experience. I did not like that book, but I think like knowing what happens and knowing what Read with Cindy's commentary was just like too funny. I could not take this book seriously. I'd also like to say The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck was one of my least favorite self-help books that I did read, mainly because of the author. I feel like he was just really disconnected from real life reality, what other people are going through and what other people's worries are, and I believe this is like a white man, so you know. Now, will I be reading 128 books this year? No. Like I said, I've been tracking my reading since 2014, and I realized early on that I don't like having a set number of books to read as my goal. I think my goal is always to read if I want to and I find it enjoyable. And I feel like I'm always looking for my next book anyway, so I always just end up reading throughout the year. And I also do book stacking. It's like a new term I learned where I read like multiple books at a time. So I always have like an audiobook and then maybe like 1 or 2 ebooks that I'm reading, and I just read whatever I'm in the mood for. More often than not, I do lean towards like a cheesy romance than a really hard-hitting nonfiction memoir book or something. So I do finish romance books at a higher rate, so I will read more of those, and I'm okay with that. You know, sometimes you need a little breather in between books. So my goals for this year are actually to slow down on reading and to read more physical books. I feel like a lot of the nonfiction books that I read would have done better if I read them physically and if I read them slower and really took the time to absorb the information that I was getting from it instead of just speeding through an audiobook and not being able to like pause, reflect, reread paragraphs over and over until I really like grasped and held that information. I think I'm gonna stop reading as many of those books on audiobook. I did it because they're easy to get on like Libby and Spotify and like harder to go to a library and pick up or put it on hold or something, but I just need to get over that hurdle because I think it's better for me if I read them physically. Actually, I used to be really embarrassed about sharing the books that I read, and I never shared my reading list with anyone, but I got over that this year and I shared it with a few friends. I think I'm just a little more confident in like the books that I'm reading and like sharing what kind of dirty filth I put in my brain. I also want to start working on putting books down. It's pretty rare for me to not finish a book once I pick it up. I have a lot of trouble with sunk cost fallacy. If I start something, I'll most likely finish it, even if it takes me a really long time. Yeah, one of the first books I read this year was White Malice by Susan Williams, and I feel like if I just let that book go and came back to it at another time, I would have liked it a lot more. And I also would have retained more information from that. Like, I was reading it as an ebook during my commute, so I was only reading it for like 20 minutes at a time, and I just really was not grasping information, and then I'd go back into it and just forget everything that happened before and was just very lost while I was reading it. I wish I just didn't stick with it as hard, and it was a book that I really wanted to read, so I knew that eventually I'd get to it. I just wish I didn't force myself to read it at that time. Knowing myself, I probably won't put that into practice, but I'd like to at least try and have that in the back of my head, like, you don't have to read this book if you don't like it. But yeah, that was my journey reading last year, 2024. I'm really excited for all the books that I get to read this year. Again, my goal is not to read over 100 books. I'm just trying to read and enjoy as many books as I possibly can, and also to read more physical books. Good luck on your reading, and I hope you have a great year, even though it's already a month in. Who knows? Maybe I'll tell you what I read. Maybe I won't tell you what I read.